Oh, hello, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome to the Smarten Show. We are Darryl Milena Weinberg, and yes, we have another member of the family here with us today. You see, it's a family show, so I think everyone should see that we are in a family environment, and family is part of everything that we do. Broadcasting, they just get involved.
Don't stick your tail where we don't want it.
Okay, that's fine. So, yes, so Smarten Up is a show about families, education, parenting, and topics related to that in nowadays that end up being connected with that. And so we're here on the lambnetwork.tv. Do check out Messianic Lamb Network for more shows. Um, speaking about different aspects of life and biblical living. And we, in particular, speak about parenting. So it's June. It's June. And
June.
I don't know what it's like in the US, but in here in Canada, June has become Pride Month. You know, it started off as having a Pride Day, Pride Week, and now we're off to having a Pride Month. We did talk about this a little bit in our last show, and so we know that this is a topic that is, you know, it seems to be a commonplace here in Canada, but at the same time, it's still relatively new thing that I guess parents, teachers, the community are trying to figure out what this is. Now, today's show is not about Pride Month. It is really about, I guess, what parents can do in the current environment. You know, what choices do they have for education? What what is happening? What is the environment? And what is happening publicly. And we all know that we've spoken in the past that our public education is, intended for the public, for, I guess, for most people. And I just wanted to start with this. So the reason I kind of have a collar and a sweater today, anyway, in our pod here at our school pod that runs out of our home, we celebrated, and it was kind of last week, but we decided to celebrate 100th day of school, and I know a lot of teachers in school do that. When we've been now in the school year in a regular school, 100th day falls a little bit earlier, but because pods are, and we'll talk a little bit more about pods as well, and how pods can obviously enrich the education of children, but pod's a little bit more flexible. So our schedule's been flexible. And so our 100th day just kind of fell last week. And one of the things that we did today, because we were supposed to do history, which is my new favorite subject in homeschool, we did a little bit of examination of what schools used to look like just mere 100 years ago. So this is the early 1900s. We even kind of start talking about the late 1800s, early 1900s. What did it look like? How did it change? And we did do a couple of shows on history of education, public education in Canada, but just kind of from the kids' perspective today. And I just wanted to share some of the things we chatted about. Just a moment. I did have it here.
Well, I wanted to start with a video, or there's a broadcast from Redacted with Clayton Morris.
So while I'm looking for like what school was like, I guess Daryl's going to, and we do that a lot. You're going to talk about what is happening in schools today in the community.
Well, we've got, and we kind of addressed this last week, but I found a really fantastic interview that was done with Clayton Morris from Redacted, who's down in the States, Clayton and Natalie Morris. And they interviewed a Canadian journalist, David Cragen, regarding the situation with Pride Month, what's going on in the schools, and how the million-person march which was started by a Muslim, is really
A
starting.
Muslim businessman.
Muslim businessman in Ottawa is really starting to have a profound impact on how parents. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump to this broadcast here.
Yeah, which will help us also to discuss a little bit some of the talks we have in Canadian legislature in different provinces
Yeah.
of parental rights and so forth. So,
Right. So here we
are
go.
you ready to share?
Yeah.
Has been following this and joins us from Ottawa, Canada. David, how did they pull this off?
Well, they haven't done it yet, but they will. And I'll tell you, this was all done under the surface because my friend who I worked with on the Million Person March, Camille El Sheikh, he's an Ottawa businessman and a Muslim activist who pulled off the Million Person March last September. And people said, "There's no way you're going to get a million people." Camille had such a network of people across the country that started with Muslim groups, but exploded with other faiths as well. So this is not just Muslims, it's Christians, it's evangelical Christians, it's Roman Catholics, it's Hindus, it's Sikhs, it's Jews, it's parents of all faiths. And they work together on this project quietly, behind the scenes, below the surface. And they're ready to go today. Today is the day. There's a nationwide walkout. Children and parents who don't want to be watching while this gay pride, and I say that in quotation marks, flag is raised at their school, will not be there. Now, Camille told me yesterday that a lot of the schools, or some of the schools, got word of this, even though they made the announcement very late in the game. And they're changing the date of the pride flag hoisting from Monday to possibly Tuesday or Wednesday. Well, they're ready for that too. They're telling their children to wear red and white clothing to represent the flag of Canada, not the rainbow flag, and that they will opt out. They will not go to any ceremonies where this flag is hoisted. Now, I can't tell you how revolutionary this is, Clayton, for Canada. This is a country where people who are usually too busy and too afraid to protest government policy, to take on the school boards, to take on provincial government education elites. But Camille and his friends, his and the people he has put together into this group have managed to care enough about Canada's children. I spoke about this at a Ottawa church yesterday to say what the Muslim community in Canada has started and how they've engaged people of all faiths. And I tell you, the applause was deafening because Christians in this country have not done enough to stop the ideological campaign that the woke left has waged against parents, whether it's gender ideology or whether it's the whole LGBTQ plus indoctrination that children are being subject to from the earliest of ages. And the pride flag is just one of them. And because June is supposedly Pride Month in Canada, the Hands Off Our Kids campaign says, no, it's my child June. It's about my children. It's not about something called pride, whatever that is. And this is what we're going to focus on. And they have taken back June for Canadian parents. And I think they're on the verge of taking back this country for common sense and for parental rights. The fact that this kind of information should be inculcated into children at home and not by parents, not by school boards, not by politicians, not by Justin Trudeau. And this is what they've been so effective in doing. And I tell you, I've never seen a movement like this in Canada. I take my hats off to Camille and the people he's put together. He's got a tremendous team. from across Canada. This is not just Ottawa. This is from Halifax to Vancouver, and these people are poised and ready to take action. And if this event is anything like the million-person march, with exceeded 1 million people, well, it actually was a 1.5 million-person march after all was said and done. I think he's going to be successful, and he's putting a lot of his own time and energy and money into making this happen. I take my hat off to him. I congratulate him. I'm I have waited so long to see Canadians concerned about their children, sufficiently concerned about their children and the future of this country, that they're willing to take this kind of action. Because
All right.
So that's sufficient. I mean, if there's anyone would like to watch more, they could do so. You said it's on which website?
That was Rumble. That was an interview with on Redacted with Clayton Morris.
All right. So back to what I was speaking about. We've kind of talked about public education in Canada. And today, just as a fun activity, we wanted to see with the kids what life was like 100 years
Right.
ago.
But before we get into that, I just want to make a quick comment about
We
what.
will be talking about that more as we go along.
Okay.
We'll get back to it.
So you want to do this first?
Well, do we want to go from the past to the present, or do we want to do this now and then talk about the past later?
Okay, so you can talk about the past.
Well, yeah, and we only played that because I was taking a moment. I did find my article. I was taking a moment. I did, like, we will talk about it. The reason, I guess, as a teacher, I'm building up from the beginning and coming to the present. I would like us to contrast some things, okay? Because that's what, if we don't see the bigger picture, if we see what's happening right here, right now, again, as we talked about, if we don't learn from history, we will repeat it and we will not see the full picture and what is happening. And so we started, and this is now an American article about, American education, but really the lifestyle here in Canada was not that different from the United States. And what we looked into, how did schools start? And really, I mean, mere like maybe over 100 years ago, schools were not such a common place. And I think some of the statistics. So, by the way, this is on a website called Mental Floss, mentalfloss.com, and the article is how school was different 100 years ago. So that was what I was looking at. And, there was no real common schools. They were not, as a matter of fact, most children didn't go to school. They were taught at home. The way schools started arising was really from the increasing of the industrial age, the industrial presence in our society. So we're going from agricultural society to industrial society. So actually, mills and factories in the U.S. had their own schools. So as factories, I guess they needed to educate people on how to, run the machinery in factories and the basics that they needed to know how to produce things. So the funny thing is, and something that the children like really sneered at, was the fact that, at that time, you probably received your education up to what's now grade 8, and then you went off to work.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the children actually had their daytime duties, either with their family business, either farms or factories or whatever they were. And then actually the schools started being as night schools. So kids had to get their education at night so they could work during the day and apply that new understanding. And it wasn't as common to go to school in the past as it is today. So in the 1900s, just over 50% of kids actually were formally educated. Think about half of the children. So it wasn't that children have always been educated in a social kind a communal environment. And and then we're talking about children of school age between 5 and 19. So only 50% of kids at that age were enrolled in schools.
Mhm.
But that changed quickly, as we talk about, as the cities started growing and industries and businesses started growing. And not it didn't take very long that 75% in the 1940s of children were enrolled in schools.
Mhm.
Um, and that was mostly because to education reform, child labor laws that were changing. So, they were kind of thinking, well, we probably need to educate the kids before we send them off to work. And how many times have we said nowadays, maybe we shouldn't baby our children so much and just send them off to work and see what it's like to work hard.
Yep.
Maybe they'll appreciate, schooling and taking time to get
Oh,
the
listen,
education.
I've said to our son many times when he starts to get picky about food, I said, listen, I'm working with a bunch of orphans over in Africa.
I
I
know
s-
there's memes on social media. It's like, I'm eating my food because of the African children.
And I said, I'll leave you with them for a couple of months and we'll see how much you change by the time you come back.
Well, and you see, the thing is, like we've talked about how the frontal lobe is in developing children, they don't think anything outside of their micro world that they exist in and of their own understanding, right? So they still haven't developed the ability to step outside of their own lives.
But a
And
lot of it has to do with training and the
yeah,
fact that, in today's society that we baby our kids so much.
yeah,
Back then, you were 14 years old and off to work you went,
yeah.
usually in the coal mines, and
Well,
you
factories, whatever there was available at the time.
yeah, and there were many children that never saw daylight.
So the more children are given responsibility, the more they will be aware and
Yeah.
and mature faster. Like one of the things we talked in history with the children in our pod was the fact that they married in their teens,
Yeah.
right? And some some teenager now they would look and say, oh, like being married so young. Well, the thing is, it was more about being a contributing member to society rather than discovering yourself, which is not a bad thing to kind of figure out who you are. But that is usually done through practical experiences with life and work.
Well, the comedian Jackie Mason, he did a skit many years ago, and he says, you get all these people going off to find themselves. He says, well, what happens if you don't like what you find?
Right. So, I mean, and the thing is, that's obviously a joke kind of thing because we also have spoken about in the past that, if you don't feel that you're the best you can be, there are ways to become better. But, it takes discipline. And we've spoken a lot about that in the past too, about
Hmm.
discipline. Um, so, um, so, where was I? So they've been so their education was up to grade 8 mostly at about 100 in the early 1900s. And high schools did exist, but very small percentage were 14 to 17-year-olds were enrolled in high school. Um, and so by 1940s, though, that obviously started increasing. Um, Okay. So, and then education for over age of 25 was only for 2.5%, 2.5% over the age of 25. Had more than like over 8 years of schooling. So that wasn't a normal thing. And I wonder, maybe life was just a little bit simpler at the time. So
Hmm.
you didn't need to be educated about all this. And we do have more technology, like I said, industry, we have more information.
Well, when we went from the Industrial Revolution or the Industrial Age into the Information Age, the education component became more and more important. You didn't need a postgraduate education in order to go get a job in a factory or
Yeah,
to be, a warehouse worker or something like
yeah,
that. And even up until probably about the 1980s, you could get a decent career. Companies tended to keep people
yeah,
for until they retired.
yeah,
This whole kind of mercenary attitude that a lot of corporations have, and a lot of that had to do with free trade, that they started shipping jobs off to other countries when the tariffs came down so that they could get cheaper labor. and it
Right.
became more and more difficult for North American workers to keep their jobs.
Yeah.
Whereas at the same time, the unions would go on strike and they would drive up wages and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So it became a vicious cycle on both ends, to where we find ourselves today, where, you know what, even getting an education, well, you experienced that.
Yeah.
You finished your bachelor's degree and Bachelor of Science, which is that's not a gimme. That's
You had to work for it.
you had to work.
to get it.
It's not a Bachelor of Fine Arts or something like
Okay,
that,
let's not put any degrees down here.
where you don't know what you've learned after you've spent for it.
Yeah.
But you know, the point is that you went out, tried to get a job after that in your field, and what did you find?
Well, I found out that a bachelor degree wasn't sufficient. And I was going to say, you almost have to be overqualified for what you're applying for in order for you to have a fair, like any chance, really. But the other thing I found out that no matter what degree I had, I wasn't going to be fired. Like, there was,
Hired.
I mean, hired, yeah. You can't
Can't be fired if you're not hired.
Exactly. But I did apply for a specific company, which I'm not going to mention. But when I got on the phone with their HR department, they said, "Do you know anyone in the company?" I said, "No." "Well, we only hire internally."
Yeah. So it's nepotism.
Right. Well, the nature of that company was that there was a high, how should I put it? What was done there was sensitive information,
Mhm.
and it was being kept, and that's
Well,
why they were hiring
Because it was a
internally.
pharmaceutical company.
It was a
So-
pharmaceutical company, yes. So that's all I'm going to
So
get to.
yeah, so the point is that the whole go to school, get a good job, get an education, get a good job, no longer really exists, and so that has come full circle to, to where it was before, that even an education doesn't really benefit you. So there's got to be alternatives now.
Well, and that's the thing, we know the generation before us, so the generation that grew up in the 40s and the 50s, I guess,
Mhm.
and for them it worked, because education wasn't common. So you getting education was an advantage for you
Yeah.
to get those jobs, the factory jobs that were a little bit, like, if you were a little bit more, um, what's the word, specialized,
Mhm.
then you were able to be paid more because you're not as easily replaced. And so getting an education was the actual advantage. And how many friends do we have? They say one of the parents brought enough money in the household so that mom could stay home and raise the children. And so that even if the children went to school, mom was involved into running the household. So while dad was bringing the money, well, that is no longer the case. We do need two incomes, and often people find two incomes are not sufficient for the inflation and what's been happening economically. And sometimes you have two incomes with two jobs each,
Yeah.
and the parents have to kind of cover their shifts in order to have the kids if they want to have kids, which
Right.
kind of discourages people from having kids as well,
Mhm.
because it makes it harder.
Right.
So typically rural areas had one room schoolhouses. And that was actually the inspiration for School Pods Canada,
Right.
because, you could have a smaller community and all the children could be educated together. There's no problem. And, what they did is, the younger kids would sit at the front because they're shorter, and the older
Mhm.
kids will sit at the back, but they were pretty much listening to the same information, and they were kind of learning at their level of understanding,
Mhm.
and that's still doable today. Just because we have so many kids in school, that's why we divide the kids into classes, but it's not necessarily how it was ever done before.
Mhm.
So you had one room schoolhouses, in obviously, in cities. You could have more because then you have more kids. It's just the volume, because people were starting to move from the land, from farms to the city, so the schools
Mhm.
naturally grew larger. Work affected the length of the school year. So our school year, the way it's designed, it's around agricultural
Yeah.
duties, right? And if kids from farming families went to school, they got to miss a little bit more of the school days because they had duties. Like, the duty to the family, helping the family, was the priority, even over education.
Sure, because if you didn't help
That's
the
how you
family,
eat. You don't.
well, yeah, and that's how you kept a roof over your head, is you kept the farm running.
Yeah.
the herbs, or
And
whatever
and
you
the
were doing.
Bible does say, you don't work, you don't eat, and if you help your family work, then your whole family eats together because
Right.
it was all communal. Um, Nowadays, and this is one thing the kids, when I show them this, the mandated school days nowadays for a school year in a public school is 180 days in the school year. At In the early 1900s was maybe 150, so like a whole month less, 30 days
Mhm.
less. But farm kids even did like less than that because there was a lot more work to be done. Um, Another thing is, this is where everybody goes. Corporal punishment was common, right?
Mhm.
Was it right? Not if it was done in anger,
Mhm.
like, and yeah, if it's not necessary. Of course, since then, a lot of philosophies and ideas about discipline have been developed. But that was just something. And you know what? Um, the reason it wasn't unusual that it would be corporal punishment in schools is because it was happening at home. It was not something like, oh my goodness, my child's in school and they got hit. Like, if that's not accepted at home, that's not going to fly in the schools. But that's what it was.
I remember we had a lady come over to our house for I believe it was Bible study one time. She was from Jamaica, and she says, if you ever got hit at school from the teacher had to discipline you. She says you would go home, and the
And you
parents
get it
would find,
again.
and you would get it twice as hard for embarrassing the family for necessitating the teacher to hit
Yeah.
you at school. I
Yeah.
mean, it was, and she said the aunts and the uncles, like the whole family, would be like running the gauntlet.
But that's what it means that a village raises the child.
But
Like, all the
kids
parents have
were
to.
kids were afraid of
Yeah.
mouthing off.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. It is because,
Yeah.
again, their frontal lobe's not developed. They don't think of the long term consequences. So sometimes that is what it. We are not endorsing a corporal punishment. We don't think that that is the most effective way, but sometimes it is. And
Yeah.
it is, and we're going to go later on in the show. We're going to talk a little bit more about parental rights and responsibilities,
Mhm.
and this is one of the things that parents need to decide
Yeah.
for themselves, but at the same time, they need to be educated. And actually, when I was in high school, we had a debating club, and one of the topics we debated is, should parents get take certification courses before they become parents?
Mhm.
And we didn't think it was a bad idea
Nope.
because,
A lot of the
yeah,
problems that we have today is because
it,
parents aren't doing their role.
and maybe it's more necessary. So most teachers were women. So it's the interesting thing was though, when kind of communal schools started. At first, it started with the teachers being men,
Mhm.
because the schools, what it was is in early Canada and early U.S. Um, Education was mostly for the boys
Yeah.
because they were the ones who were running the business or whatever. The girls actually stayed home and learned homemaking skills.
Yep.
So
Which is a lost art nowadays.
I'm not commenting, but but that's something that the family is responsible
Yeah.
for. I believe whatever value is passed on, it has to be. And if the children don't get it home, then they could look for that elsewhere. But that's what parents do. And so anyway, but obviously, especially after World War II, when a lot of men went off to war, women started working in factories. They needed to be educated. So that's kind of changed around a little bit the presence of women in schools and in the workforce.
Mhm.
And so it quickly changed to now mostly women being the teachers. And they had to be single women, though, because education, being a teacher, was a dedication to the profession, because it was still in a place where once a female teacher would marry, she was expected to dedicate herself to her family.
Yep.
So she wasn't expected to have a divided attention now between family and the school. So
Mhm.
she had to give up her position to the next single lady who was ready to become a teacher.
And it was really the whole feminism movement of the 1960s that was driven by the CIA with Gloria Steinem and whatnot
Mhm.
that caused people to rethink this whole, the primary responsibility of the woman was the home, and that we need to break free from those shackles, and we need to climb the corporate ladder and things like that. And it was the very intentional attack against the family unit and the household and
Yeah.
how it ran.
Well, yeah, because you know what? It's not a bad thing for a mother to be there with her children. The children need their mother. I mean, just from a biological point of view, but also to be taught
Yep.
and to be nurtured and somebody to watch over them.
And our son has had the benefit of actually having us both work from home for most of his life, and it's had a profound impact on him and a positive one.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. He's a confident child. Everybody comments on his just being well adjusted, but we digress talking about
Yes.
our wonderful child. And so at first, because of the whole role of men and women that people were figuring out, they were trying to separate boys and girls. Like in some schools, they would enter from different entrances.
Yeah.
Just because of the dynamics, it wasn't accepted at the time. Um, Unfortunate, and I know that was happening a lot in the United States. I don't know about Canada, but I'm here in Canada was too. But the racial segregation was also something that was an issue in schools. Um, it wasn't a good part of history, but eventually there were steps taken towards, especially Black families, to have their kids go into the regular public schools.
Mhm.
And now that we're talking about Pledge of Allegiance, that was said in American schools. Now, what was done in Canadian schools? We don't have a Pledge of Allegiance.
Mhm.
We used to say what in Canadian schools every morning?
Well, we used to do the Lord's Prayer, but then we also used to say, "God save the Queen."
Yeah. So that was just a normal part of what we would say in the
Dedication
morning.
to the crown.
Well, yes, and that's what Canada is known for. That it's dedication to the and loyalty to the royal family. So that was a common thing that was done. A lot of school involved memorization because kids of different age groups were learning together.
Mhm.
The children were given facts for them to memorize. And you know what? If that school is only all about, that may not be as fulfilling, but that's a vital part. I tutor a lot of kids after school, and I'll tell you, they don't know their multiplication tables, and that goes all the way up to high school. Even some college students I tutor, and that is a detriment because that makes it difficult for them. Yes, you can always refer to it, but that's a good exercise for the brain. So
Mhm.
we should not be in. What was the joke? Are you concerned about the increase of artificial intelligence nowadays? And the response is, no, I'm not. I'm more concerned about
Lack of
the
real
decrease of real and natural intelligence. So if we,
Mhm.
a- AI increase should not affect us if we don't rely on it so much that our own
Mhm.
intelligence suffers as a result, right?
Mhm.
So there was mostly memorization. So in the late 19th century, early 20th century is when what we call progressive education started. And actually, one of the facts I learned today that the first female superintendent in the United States was elected in Chicago. And so she started kind of bringing one thing that she was really adamant about is that teachers had to be trained and educated. They have to
Mhm.
have their own, and that's not a bad thing. And we talked about that in Canadian schools. Canadian school system, public school system, was very much based on what was happening in the U.S. Really,
Yeah.
and one thing that Ryerson brought in was specific schools for educating children, teachers
Yeah.
to teach children. Um, and the thing is, because there was progressiveness, one of the things, and this is actually something that schools are trying to replicate nowadays, which schools becoming microcosms of communities with kids running the show. Now, not kids running the show the way it's happening today. But the early ideas of kids running the show was the kids cooked food for one another. They even made the furniture for the school. See, when we say kids running the show doesn't mean the kid decides every single decision what happens in the school, but they get to be contributing members to the micro society of the school. And I think that's a vital component of what we want school pods to be like,
Right.
to build communities and the kids to so kids run the show means they have more responsibility. Yeah. So some other things I'm going to kind of skip through a few points because people can go through that. But even some schools encourage kids to even purchase their own school supplies or even food, and there was and so forth. So kids running the show doesn't mean they get more rights and privileges. It means they get more responsibilities and involvement into the running of the day. And I think that's something we're going to keep exploring. But yeah, so I'm going to stop here because now we're hitting some of the points that were mentioned in the video that you put in there, which is now we're talking about parental rights. We're talking now children's rights. We're talking now about how these good ideas from the past, that what we call progressive education, have been misinterpreted and brought to a very unbalanced way we run our education. So, what are some comments you wanted to make about?
Well, first and
The video.
foremost, the comment that David Creighton made, and he said he was speaking in a church. Now, I don't know if he's a Christian or not. I don't get the impression that he is. But regardless of whether he is or he isn't, his comment about how it is the Muslim community that has spearheaded this whole thing and the Christian community has not stood up for children. I mean, what a condemnation against the body of Messiah.
And I wanted to talk about this because I did look in a little bit into the 1 million march, right? Which was the movement that started, actually the Muslim community started that in September of last year. That's 2023. And what it was, the school year was starting and parents wanted to say, we're going to send our kids, but we don't want them to be indoctrinated. Like, we want to have more of a say of what our children are learning. We want to teach our children about sexuality and spirituality at home. We don't want that to be done in schools, especially when it violates a lot of the beliefs. And I know, I was just kind of reading a CTV news about those rallies that happened last September, and they were talking about how some of the things were aimed against the LGBTQ, and horror of horrors, having any the gender ideology was called a sin, and I know a sin, like, it's interesting because people who don't believe in the Bible and they don't really kind of understand what sin is, when you call something a sin, they get offended.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if you don't care whether your actions are considered sin or not, then you shouldn't be offended. But the thing is, now they're Christians and Muslims are being condemned about the fact that they call it. Well, you know what? When your belief system and the God that you believe in and you follow and serve, it has specifically stated that any kind of sexual conduct is not the way you were designed to be, then yes, it is not desirable for you that your children be taught that.
Well, and especially when you start looking at all of the consequences of these types of lifestyles, the suicide rates, the depression rates, the mental illness, you've got drug abuse,
There are
alcoholism,
statistics, yeah.
and you can't argue with these stats.
Now, I know that some of the things that are being said as well, the reason there's so much suicide and depression and so forth is because of the
The bullying.
rejection and marginalization. But the thing is, if that lifestyle is fulfilling you, then, I mean, how many people are bullied? And, somebody, I saw some, like, something that says, oh, it was Rowan Atkinson, the British actor. And obviously, he's not a man that is considered by standards, a good-looking man,
Hmm.
and he was actually bullied and made fun of in school.
Yeah.
And I saw an article where he was quoted saying, "You know what? Rejection was my biggest fuel, was my biggest motivation to
Oh,
succeed."
yeah. And you know what? I was bullied when I was younger, and it led me to starting to take martial arts when I was a teenager.
So, but what we're saying is, if we
I
teach,
wasn't suicidal about it, is the
well,
point.
but the thing is, what I'm saying is that if we teach our children good values and to be good people, then they would not be struggling with identity. They would not be struggling with what is good and what is not, and who am I and what is my purpose.
But if you don't have a firm foundation in who you are, or you are in conflict with your nature, and that's really what that kind of lifestyle is all about, is you are in conflict with how you were created, then of course it's going to provide and create an environment where you're going to need to self-medicate. Or and now the absolute terrifying thing is that the Canadian government is advocating for assisted suicide for people who are suffering from depression. I've
Yeah.
been starting to read articles about, and not only here in Canada, but other places in the world. There was the where was the Brussels was the airport bombing, was it? When you were coming back through Europe.
I believe so.
I
Yeah.
think, or Belgium.
In Belgium. Yeah.
Yeah. And there was, I think it was last year, that there was a young lady who had survived the bombing. So that was when there was a terrorist attack in the Brussels airport.
Several years ago. Yeah.
And it was 2015, I think it was when
16.
2016.
Mhm.
And this girl was depressed ever since then, and she committed suicide through state assisted suicide last year
Yeah.
because she couldn't overcome the thing. And I thought, you survive a terrorist attack, and then the
Then
state
you
helps
commit
you,
suicide.
and then the
Yeah.
state helps you in your life. And she was young; she was like, I
Yeah.
think 23 or something like
Well,
that.
and that's the thing when you're talking about this. Okay, we're teaching this ideology, and then we are teaching that you could decide, and killing oneself is okay, because what does euthanasia mean? Oh, it's okay to do it. Like what does it put in the minds of children?
Yeah.
And so
Well, even
where the checks and balances of one kind of leads to the other, leads to the other, like you are now having a floodgate of where ending life has become easier and easier.
Well, and video games play a large part of that, because what happens with video games? You have lives, and what happens if you die? If you lose a
you get
life,
another one.
you
Well,
just get
that's
another one.
not the
That's the
reality.
whole idea of reincarnation, or a false resurrection, or something like that. Whereas the Bible says it is appointed man once to die, and after that, you don't get 3 lives, you don't get 5 lives, you don't get to put another quarter or 50
Right.
cents or $1 or something like that and just start over again.
Yeah, well, and this is why I believe that Muslims and Jews and Christians take their choices in this life right now so seriously, because they know that they will give an account to God. And
Mhm.
so when we know that we're going to face God, whether you believe it or not, this is what, there's more to that than to life that is here right now.
Yeah.
So when we face God, eventually what happens is you don't want to be ashamed of the fact that you gave in because somebody gave you pressure to go against what you
Yeah.
believed and what your family believed.
Mhm.
So the so that's about the Million People March.
Mhm.
And gender ideology is, it's just an idea, right? It's an idea. Yes, certain people feel certain way, and but when you think about it, there's the biology behind things.
Yeah.
We come of two varieties as human beings,
Mhm.
and then what we choose to believe is different. But the thing is, when we start confusing children from a young age, saying, well, you're not a boy or a girl, you could be this, you could be that, and the other,
But then when
like,
you have surgery, why is it that we're saying that you need to go?
reassign a gender reassignment if there's no gender?
It can only be male or female.
Yeah. So it becomes so confusing that it's maddening even to parents, never mind to young children who are just learning what the world is all about. How
Yeah.
does it work? And children, and this is what we've talked about when education is given to children, they need some kind of frame framework to work within. They need rules. They need, just because they want to know what's coming, what to predict, and that gives them some kind of safety. But if you say you can change everything about yourself, well, then it becomes like you lose yourself when you become anything. When you can choose one day to be one self and the next day another
If
self.
you don't have certain fundamental absolute truths that your whole foundation is based on, and this is when satanic doctrine, it's all about bringing unreality into the picture, because when you have unreality, it means that don't have anything to stand on. You're not sure of anything. People who don't have absolute beliefs about certain things tend to not be sure about anything in life,
Yeah.
whereas people who have a fundamental driving philosophy about whatever it is, about who they are, whether it be as a
How the
Christian or
world
something,
works,
how
yeah.
the world works, they're much more confident that when something false comes along, they can say, "Well, that's not true," and
All
why are
right.
you saying that?
And you could say that's not part of my belief system. And that's one thing I was really convicted because I didn't live my whole life believing in God.
Hmm.
And you know what? I kept searching because I never was satisfied with the things that whether parties or
Hmm.
studying science or whatever. Like these were all things that I'm glad I experienced, but they were not satisfying me. And so eventually when I start reading the Bible and realize that God has designed everything and there's a purpose and a design to everything,
Yeah.
it gave me a lot of um understanding and kind of like I kind of fell into my identity at that point. And so that really helped me understand who I am better, actually.
Hmm.
And so when you have that, it gives you the confidence, I suppose.
Hmm.
And the thing is, though, I'm not sure where I was going with that, but all the parents that are um, protesting is, oh yes, I wanted to talk about that. A lot of parents are concerned about the sexual content of what is being discussed in school at a very young age.
And why are they doing it? There is absolutely no logical reason for you to expose, even if you believe this stuff is okay as an adult,
Yeah.
which it is not. I mean, the Bible is
According to the Bible and
Bible's very
God.
clear, but again, you go back to those who have promiscuous lifestyles, and there are there's got depression, you've got diseases, you've got all kinds of stuff. But
Yeah.
even if you're okay with that as an adult, what person
Why
in the
the
right
children have
what
to?
person in their right mind would talk to a child about these things and start to put those ideas that there's only one reason that it could be for that,
And
and
what? Yeah.
it's about grooming, and
Yeah.
it's about using children for a fetish, and a perversion that will damage them beyond belief. Any child who was sexually abused when they were younger goes through immense difficulties in life trying to overcome those things.
Yeah. And it is very, very difficult because there's something about them that is so broken that it's hard to repair. And that's one of actually, in addition to the saying, train up a child the way he should go, so when he's older, he'll not depart from it. My second favorite saying is, it's easier to build strong children than
To fix
to,
broken
to fix
adults.
broken adults later on in life. I mean,
Absolutely.
anyone who has had to go through any programs. So I think, and sexuality has nothing to do with the identity of a child. As
Nope.
a matter of fact, until they hit puberty, they don't even think about that of a natural, like naturally.
Well,
So
again,
that has to be indoctrinated, and that's what parents are really protesting.
exactly. I mean, you talk about the fact that when you were younger, you were a tomboy, and that
Oh,
you,
yeah.
because you had an older brother and it was of interest to you, you know what, eventually you hit puberty, you started becoming a young lady, and it was like, dresses aren't such a bad thing.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. And to this day, I'm thankful that I wasn't the tomboy that I was in my age like today, because then
You would have been
people,
given puberty blockers
yeah,
and
I would
told
have
to
been told, because I didn't want to wear skirts. I wanted to wear pants. I wanted to play with the boys because I had an older brother, and that was the friends that I knew. And so my mother had to force me to wear a skirt, and I refused. And so nowadays I would have been told, well, you're a boy then, if that's no, I'm not. And when I had puberty, I very much became a woman. And I know there are a lot of stories, but if I had to make some permanent change to my body at that age, once I realized who I am, it would have been like I wouldn't have been able to fulfill who I
You
am.
start getting surgeries to take away fundamental body
But why
parts,
do we have to do that?
puberty
If
blockers, which mess up your hormonal
if
balance. I mean, it's
gender
horrible.
is not a fixed thing, then why do we change it?
Yeah, exactly.
So
Let it go back and forth throughout your life, and you can be
well,
whatever you want to be on.
and that's why I think the other movement that was mentioned is to keep your hands off my children. It
Yeah.
was one of the sexualization, but the other one was the medical intervention with children. And I'm sorry, but I did take biomedical ethics because I was in pre-med school when I did my Bachelor of Science. And in the biomedical ethics, it said it is still the patients, like they are the ones who decide what treatment they get.
Mhm.
And if a patient is not able to, then it's their family. Family is very important. And if we destroy the family, then the system can decide for us what to do, and we don't have a voice. If you're a lone voice, if divided from your family and your community, then you're more easily defeated. And so that is why we're talking about the importance of family in the show, and that is the battle that is worth fighting for.
Yeah.
And this is why parents are now marching in Canada, because you know what? We have allowed, Canadians do allow a lot of things to happen to them before they even say anything.
Yeah.
And we just happen to be in a time where it is starting to destroy our nation. It's no longer making our nation strong and prosperous. I mean, we're not going to talk about the deficit that our country is in and the pressure that puts on people on daily basis. Because you know what? Sexuality and all these things and economics, they all add pressure onto the families until families are destroyed. And I think that's why we're starting to hear more about parents raising their voices.
Mhm.
Are there parents who make bad choices? Yes, there are. But I think most parents in society are adults who care for their children
Well,
and they know them best.
everybody makes bad choices. We make bad choices as
Yeah.
parents, but that doesn't change the fact that we still have at the core our son's best interest at heart in what we're doing. We're not perfect about it, but I'm not going to let some administrator who has another agenda be making the decisions about what happens with my son,
Yeah.
because I don't know who these people are. I don't know what their background is. I don't know what their objectives are.
Well, we have spoken about the fact that the sex ed curriculum here in Ontario was written by a man who was later convicted
Of pedophilia
of
and-
pedophilia because there was evidence found on his computer.
Child pornography.
Yeah. So, and that was never removed from our schools. So, parents who really care for their children will go, well, why was nothing done for that?
Yeah. Guy went to jail, but we're still using his philosophy, and obviously he was a pervert. He was
And
a
so
sick
we've only
man.
modified the curriculum
Well, it's got
slightly.
worse.
But yeah, we did not start everything from scratch. And the other thing is, we had our son in public school at the time when their sex ed curriculum was brought in, and I just remember us getting a letter saying, "This is what we're doing, starting the spring of whatever year it was," and
And we said,
and then we as parents said, "Well, wait a minute, nobody asked us." Whether this is okay with us,
Yeah.
whether we want the school to teach that or we could teach that
Yeah.
to our children. So this is why we started to have talks.
Yeah.
And I think what I want to talk about very quickly is this is why we started School Pods Canada.
Absolutely.
And our slogan is we give parents a voice in their child's education.
Yep.
Because you know what? We still believe in the goodness of family and the importance of family, and we believe that parents need to make choices for their children. And when you train up the children properly and put good values in them, when they grow up to be adults, then they'll start making their choices.
Yeah. So all that being said, you need to be responsible for what happens with your children. You need to advocate for them, because there are predators out there that are looking to destroy them. And so that's why we started School Pods. If you want more information, reach out to us, contact us, schoolpodscanada.com. We'd love to talk to you. So we've come to the end of our hour. Thank you, everybody, so much for watching, either live or on demand. And we will look forward to seeing you next week right here on Lamb Video Network. Have a great week, everybody.
Bye-bye and smarten up.
If you missed today's show or want to watch it again, or want to tell someone where they can watch this episode, go to lamnetwork.tv, where you can find this show and all the other live Lamb Show archives in the on-demand section of the website. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to tell someone about the Messianic Lamb Network. We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussions, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take a tour of the lamnetwork.tv website. I'm Darryl Weinberg, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.